Serious, what is your most terrifying, we need to leave, now, random rush of fear you've felt? At a summer camp, a buddy of mine and I climbed out onto a tin roof of a big hall that was built on the side of a steep hill. On one side you could climb out, right onto the roof. On the other side it was a 3-story fall onto concrete. Being teenage idiots, we climbed from the low side over the peak of the sloped metal roof and were inching down towards the edge of the high side. We had sneakers on, and had pretty solid footing, so it wasn't outrageously dangerous. Then, out of absolute nowhere, raindrops started falling. We both look at each and realize this is really bad and try to start backing up. But wherever there is even the slightest dampness, the metal is now completely slick. There is nothing to hold on to. The grip of the rubber shoes on dry metal was all we had. I look at him and see the panic in his eyes that I'm feeling, too. We are trying to move up this roof as fast as we can, and the raindrops are falling harder every second. I see him break completely free and start sliding down with his eyes frozen in terror. Somehow, miraculously, he stops sliding. I made it to the top, scrambled down, grabbed a branch and leaned back over the top, trying to give him something to grab. He eventually makes it high enough to grab the branch and I pull him up and over. I have never felt panic like that. We were so lucky to make it out of there. Attention! Serious tag notice. Jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment. Parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an ARMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit if you have any questions or concerns. This was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. It's a bit long, but bear with me. For context, I live only a few streets away from my workplace. This guy came to my floor one day for a team meeting. Ever since then he made a point to pass my desk when walking to the kitchen, which doesn't make sense logistically as the elevator basically opens right onto the kitchen. Keep in mind, this guy is a complete stranger. Nobody had ever seen him on our floor, so my work friends knew he purposely came to our floor just to see me. He would make excuses to be near me whenever I am in the kitchen, e.g. to get a glass of water whilst I am washing my dishes. He was always alone, never spoke to anyone, only watched me. This happened for about 3 months. One day he happened to be downstairs at the time I finish work. He then knew exactly what time I finish and waited downstairs for me every day. He just sat there watching, waited for us to leave, then went back up. One day I walked out with a friend. We saw him sitting downstairs, quickly walked out of the building and parted ways, assuming he would go back up now that we'd left. Boy, was I wrong. My friend walked off in the opposite direction, leaving me alone. I had crossed the road and was just about to turn to the direction of my apartment, when some higher power compelled me to turn around. The feeling that rushed over me just then, I had never felt it before. It was like a mix of all the most negative emotions in the world all swirling into one massive super cloud of fear. When people talk about the flight or fight response, this was literally the epitome of that. To this day I still cannot understand what made me turn around when I generally never do that. I was smart enough to go in a completely different direction so he wouldn't know where I live. He walked a short distance behind, crossed the road and checked to see where I was walking home to. Another male colleague happened to finish work at the same time this went down, followed him and waited to see what he was doing, stalking the stalker. He confirmed that he absolutely followed to see which direction I was going, and then went back into the building once I had walked too far ahead. He would have only need to follow me a short distance to see where I lived. This happened a few more times before I finally reported his ass and got him banned from entering all buildings associated with my company. Turns out he didn't even actually work for my company, external contractor, and shouldn't have even been in my building in the first place. When I was a preteen, a strange man stopped and asked me for directions that didn't make sense. As I'm trying to help him, a van rolls up and the side door opens. I just booked it and never looked back. Damn, I had a similar experience when I was 14. I was walking home from school when a creepy older guy pulled over his work van, got out, was asking me for directions to a well-known local place. and feigning like he didn't understand what I was saying, in an obvious attempt to draw out the conversation. So that alone set off alarm bells in my head. But then he kept looking around the whole time, and I knew he was about to try something. Some lady happened to be walking from her house to her car, so I yelled out, "Hey mom, can you come here and help give this guy directions?" Surprisingly, the lady actually came over, and as she did, she yelled something like, "Your father and your big brothers will be out in a minute. Are you ready to go?" He looked panicked, quickly got back into his car and took off. Once he left, that lady told me she knew what was up and made sure I was okay, before letting me use her phone to call the cops. Turns out I wasn't the only girl he tried to lure, abduct. My faith in humanity was both damaged and restored that day. One of the times I ran away from my abusive mother, I was hiding out at an internet cafe. For context, I was 12. I'd been there for a few days, and the guy running the show overnight knew me and knew what was going on at home because I'd laid it on him a few months earlier when he was like, "Hey, it's 2 a.m, don't you need to go home?" He didn't care about me especially, but he didn't care enough to kick me out either, so long as I wasn't causing any trouble. He'd let me sleep under one of the desks at the back, etc., since it was always quiet as overnight. Anyway, this night I was just hanging out the back of the cafe, bored with nothing to do, and my brain was like, go to the bathroom, but I didn't need to pee or anything, so I was like, and then my brain was more urgent, go to the bathroom now, so I was like, okay, and did. Went into a stall and just kinda stood there for a few minutes confused, then went back out. The guy on the front desk comes over and was like, "Dude, someone just came in asking if I'd seen you. Said it was your mother." After a cycle of running away, getting caught, running away again, I finally got away from her and had CPS take my allegations seriously 2 years later, and moved to different city, but moved back about 5 years ago. I'm not really a believer in psychic links, etc., but since I've been back, I've sometimes had this feeling in myself like a deep dread. And then I look around and see my mother walking down the road across the street, or driving past me or something. I was getting a coffee about 6 months back and got that feeling, so looked around, just in time to see her walking into the store. One night when I was very young and at a bar, I got quite drunk. Some guy propositioned me to go back to his place and I was up for it. I left my car, because he told me to just ride in since I had been drinking so much, and we went riding down the road. It was quite a ways, and I started to question him where we were going. He said it was just up the road on the river. He pulls over to the side of US 1 and points to a 2-story house on the river. It was very dark and the only light was of the moon. We walked down the dock to get to the front door. He gets in front of me and is playing with the doorknob, and as he pushes it open, he turns to me and says, "Please don't make me turn the light on and let you see how dirty my place looks." So of course, drunk and stupid, I said no problem, and probably giggled. He guides me by the hand up a set of stairs. We get to the top and he says, "I just have a mattress on the floor, I hope you don't mind." And again, drunk and stupid me just sits down on the mattress, not thinking about anything. As I sit there in the dark, I start to get my vision becoming clearer. Everything looks off. The mattress has no sheet on it, and I hear a whisper in my ear, "Get out." I jumped up. I ran down the stairs. I ran out of the door and down the dock. I ran across US 1, and up to a house that was across the street. I ran up to the door and started beating on the door and screaming for help. I turn and look, and the guy is running across US 1 at me, chasing me. I start screaming more and more, as now I'm afraid this house is abandoned. Right as the guy gets up about 10 feet away, the porch light turns on. The guy stops, turns around, and went back to his truck. Poor guy whose door I was beating on came out and saw me crumbled, crying on his porch. The sweet man got in his car and drove me back to the bar 20 miles away so that I could get my car. I never saw him again. I never even knew his name. But he saved my life. I know he did. Went to a movie on Halloween when I was in high school with my boyfriend at the time. It was a huge theater where there was a staircase all the way to the top row that opened in the middle of the row so you could sit on either side of the opening. My boyfriend and I sat in the back row on one side of the opening. We were watching the movie and around 30 to 40 minutes after the movie started, a guy walked in by himself wearing a big sweater and sat on the other side of the opening. He didn't really do anything at first, but he gave me a bad feeling and I felt uncomfortable, but I continued watching the movie. I noticed the guy seemed really nervous and wasn't paying any attention to the movie. I really couldn't figure out why, but he was stressing me out big time and I just felt like we had to get the out of there. I told my boyfriend that I was probably being silly, but I wanted to leave. As we were leaving, we informed the staff about the guy just in case. Turns out they had been looking for him, as people had reported seeing a guy of that description behaving strangely in the parking lot earlier. The police came and he apparently had quite a few large hunting knives hidden under his sweatshirt. In high school, my buddy and I were riding our dirt bikes on the trails that ran around the logging roads in SWR. Thousands and thousands of acres of undeveloped land with just gravel logging roads and trails. We were on our way back to the truck when we stopped at an intersection to figure out which way to turn. 3 dudes in overalls, no shirts and full-face helmets rode out of the woods on quads. They rode a few slow circles around us, then took off back into the woods. We booked the out of there. Turns out all that undeveloped land is also good for growing, cooking, and dumping. When me and 2 of my cousins went camping with our family, probably about 8 to 9 years old, we stayed in a campground that had a playground near our spot. We would often go, just the 3 of us, to play and go back to our camper when it started to get dark because it wasn't too far. But one day we were playing and we weren't the only kids there, but this man 40s came up to us with a dog and started talking to my cousins, and they were very trusting. He kept asking them if they wanted hot dogs or cookies and where they were from, and telling us that his camper was just over there if we wanted snacks. This guy gave me a super weird vibe immediately, so I looked at my cousins after being quiet the whole time and said, "I think I hear grandma yelling for us. Dinner is probably ready," and they argued and were confused, but after I gave them the look, they just shrugged and listened to me. That guy gave me the heebie-jeebies and we never saw him again after that day. My mom and I were walking our dog on a semi-secluded dried-up riverbed. For context, I was probably 7 or 8. A couple approached us, and instantly something in my gut told me that they weren't safe. The man asked some weird question like, "Is it just you and your daughter here?" and then proceeded to say that he took pictures of kids for a living and that he would love to have me model for him. I didn't wait to hear the rest of the conversation because after that I took off. And I'm ashamed to admit, left my mom and dog behind with the creepy guy. My mom was livid, saying how rude I was and how worried she was because she didn't know where I went. But the intense leave now feeling that came over me totally clouded any sort of reasoning. Don't feel guilty. You were the child and more vulnerable in this situation. Sometimes we must be rude to be safe. Predators prey on people's desire to be polite. Predators prey on people's desire to be polite. My car was stolen the very night I moved into my new house in a very good neighborhood. The neighbors had warned us that the neighborhood was being targeted at the time. They mentioned a woman around the corner that opened the door for knockers in the middle of the night, and they attacked her and robbed her and almost killed her. We had reported the car stolen and did the police reports when it happened. Well, 2 nights later in the middle of the night I hear a knock on the door and they said, "Open up. It's the police." Well, since I had heard the story about the other lady, I was suspicious and did not answer. I grabbed my kids and put them in my daughter's room because it had access to the roof from the window. I called the police to say that 2 men claiming to be police are pounding on my door. They said there was no police in the area and they're sending a car. Turns out, these same guys stole the car and came back for seconds. I did get my car back because they brought it with. I used to drive for Lyft. Last year, I picked up a young couple from a bar at about 1:30 a.m. They were fairly chill and I figured it would be my last ride of the night. The dude asked me to stop at a corner store on the way to their destination so that he could get cigarettes. I didn't see any harm in waiting, so I stopped and had a nice chat with the young woman while he was in the store. He ended up being about 5 minutes since everyone was trying to get the pre-2 beer. When he came out, he asked me to take him to a location that was in the opposite direction of their destination, but was only about a mile away. He said he wanted to meet some friends real quick and grab some beer. Since I figured it would be my last ride of the night, I said, it, why not, and drive him over there. Now, I know the town we live in fairly well, but the direction that we were coming from was not a way I was used to going when I would go to this location. So when I turned onto the destination street, I missed the turn into the complex parking lot. I just came to a complete stop since the roads were empty and asked them if they just wanted me to park on the street or pull into the complex. This is when the two of them started arguing, as he suddenly wanted to go in and hang out for a few minutes while she didn't want to go in at all. She just wanted him to do his thing and get out of there so they could go home. And then something hit my car. The sound is unmistakable to me, so I immediately started to look around to figure out what it was. But there were no other cars on the road, so that couldn't have been it. Then I moved to the next thing on my mental checklist, of something didn't hit me. Then what did I hit? But that didn't make any sense either, as I'd been in park and couldn't have hit anything. It's at this point that the young lady's attitude completely changed. She just kinda looked around, and then said, "Can we just get out of here? It hurts and I want to go home." This was odd to me, as she'd been sitting in my car for about 10 minutes at this point and hadn't said a word about any kind of pain. She followed this up with, "It hurts and I can't move," put her hand to her back, and pulled it out covered in blood. What the So the guy starts freaking out, thinking that something in my trunk had exploded, but it was empty. As he reached over to tend to her, I noticed something white sticking out of the seat. This hadn't been there at the beginning of the night, so I asked him what it was. He pulled on it. It was a piece of the filler fuzz from my seat. It came out of the hole that had been made in the seat, because she'd been shot. As soon he grabbed that fuzz, we both had the same realization. He slammed shut his door and I drove them straight to the hospital, which was only a couple of miles away. That realization, and the follow-up realization of, oh, someone could still shoot you while you're sitting here, was one of the most terrifying things I'd ever experienced.